This week I'm going to show you how to make these flexible hedges that could work in any tabletop environment from wargaming to TTRPGs. And they're ridiculously cheap and easy to create yourself.
Hi, I'm Seb and I make stuff. And I'm sitting in a very messy workspace because I'm working on about 5-6 different projects at once. Throughout this madness, last night I decided to have a go at a new type of hedge. As you might have seen from some of my previous videos, I've been doing a lot of stuff with my hedge mazes lately and they turned out great. But one of my comments throughout there and a few other posts I've seen around lately really brought up a cool idea. What if we made some smaller hedges that could be used like fences, but made them flexible? So last night I played around with a proof of concept and I came up with this, and they worked perfectly. These can be bent into any shape and bent back to normal. Any point throughout the build can be bent, and they're going to give a whole lot of flexibility for some awesome hedges. The base for this build was some scouring pads that I got for about 70 cents from my local supermarket and some craft wire that I picked up from a dollar store for about $3.
So we take our scouring pads and wire and cut them down to about the size that you want your hedge fence to be. It's nice and flexible and has a good green base. My first attempt was to try and poke a hole through the middle. I got out a bamboo skewer and just kept trying to shove it through until I had a decent opening that I could fit the wire into. This technically worked, but was way more effort than I think was required and wouldn't really work for longer pieces of hedge. So what I decided to do was cut out 2 long strips and glue them together with the wire in the middle. Once I had the wire cut down, I glued either end down with quite a bit of super glue and then put a few little sections in the middle just to make sure that the wire would hold place, then using a super glue accelerant to speed up the process. Once I was happy with this, I really heavily coated the inside with that same gel-like super glue and pressed my pieces together as hard and firm as I could until the glue started to dry. To speed this process up, again, I really doused the entire thing with the super glue accelerant, letting it soak through the fibers and dry all of our glue. Instantly, this was working exactly how I wanted. I think the fibers being a bit looser allows the glue to pull and stretch without breaking. But if I really wanted to make these a better long-term solution, I think I would use some more flexible glue. As I started making some more, instantly I realized that I was cutting these all to different heights. So I cut off one small piece and decided to use that as my generic height going forward, kind of as a guide so that all of my hedges would match. And now we have a few base pieces. We'll cut down the wire and glue everything together, leaving us with 3 or 4 base pieces for our tests.
I was absolutely stoked that these worked on my first attempt. Usually it takes a few tests and practice to get something right, but this was a very rough design and it came out perfectly. So now we just got to make them look a little bit nicer and get them ready for your table. What we're going to need next is some spray adhesives, some flockings, and something to catch all of our extra bits and pieces as they fall off. So I'm going to grab out a couple of different flockings here. You can pick these up from local game shops or Amazon or finding anything you like online. I have a big collection of these that I picked up over the years. I think I'm going to go with these 2 right here. So for this, we're going to mix these together to get a bit of variation, cover our base in glue, and then stick it all together.
So I tend to mix a few different flockings when I do things like this, as I find that the more variety, the more natural the end result looks. Now I'm happy with the mix, I'll grab my spray adhesive and my hedge bases and take them outside for a heavy coat. I'm really going to cover these guys in a lot of this spray adhesive and then leave them to sit for about 10 minutes for it to go tacky. Once that is ready to go, we just dunk them straight into our flocking and everything starts to stick together quite nicely. Sometimes you might need to do a couple of layers to fill in all those gaps, but what I quite like about these green bases of the scouring pads is it doesn't really matter if a little bit shows through, as it's the right kind of colour for the base of a hedge. And then we leave these to fully set.
So while that has a chance to set, I'm going to try and make some more rough looking hedges that are less perfectly squared off and well kept. For this, I'm going to be using polyester wadding. I don't know exactly what this stuff is meant to be used for, but I've had this pack for ages and it's come in really handy for a whole heap of different natural builds. I've used it for tree canopies and scatter overgrowth that I've got on a lot of my older videos, but today we're going to be wrapping this stuff up in some more of this craft wire and trying to repeat the process we did before, but this time hopefully getting something that's a little bit more rough and wild looking.
So we tear a piece of the wadding off and start to separate it. This stuff is sort of layered and you generally can get 3 or 4 smaller thin layers out of it. I'm going to cut my wire down to roughly the size that I want and play around with rolling it up. I quite liked this, but it didn't stick together exactly as well as I wanted. So I sprayed the whole thing with that same quick grip we used earlier, placed my wire center in the middle and rolled it up nice and tight. This held together much better. I trimmed off the edges and kind of just shaped it a little bit more, hoping we'd have a slightly flatter base before taking it outside and giving it a very heavy paint using a green spray paint. I had to roll this around a bit and make sure I hit all the edges and really let it soak in. And once that had a chance to dry, I came in with a heavy coat of our spray adhesive glue and then repeated the process with our flocking. I think it could have had a bit more time to dry as I ended up with green paint all over my hands, but ultimately this gave me a really nice effect, leaving me with a much more rounded off hedge that has a less well kept feel to it. Now I'll pour all my excess flocking into a cup and keep that for later in case we want to repeat the process with more hedges.
So all of those have had a night to dry and they've come out perfectly. They've got a little bit of excess flocking which can come off with just a little shake. And we're left with some really nice natural looking hedges that'll sit nicely on your table, can be bent and flexed into any shape that you desire and then brought back for the most reusable piece of terrain that I think I have designed, full stop. The flocking has covered up most of the joint on the top, but you can still see a little bit of separation. If I had these cut more evenly, I probably would have avoided that. Honestly, for how cheap and easy these were, they are one of the coolest things that I've made in a while and one of the most practical, reusable pieces of scatter that I have come up with. These can go down on any tabletop environment, whether you're playing TTRPGs, war games, or just making dioramas or model trains or anything along those lines. It could even go into a little fairy garden or diorama display. So there's a lot of practical use for these,
especially because we can make them in different types. So this is what our more rounded piece with the wadding looked like in the end. It's a much more rounded off, less perfectly kept hedge, but still has the same full flexibility.
Ultimately, I'm really stoked with how these turned out, considering it was a complete shot in the dark to see if this would work. So let's get a few shots of them down on the table with some other bits and pieces of terrain and see how they look when laid out for your game.
All of our flat pieces look nice. We'll add in our more rounded off raider piece and then a few bits of scatter from our previous builds. Now we have a really nice looking garden area that we can manipulate on the fly or change up for different game environments. And with our ability to swap between the 2 different types, we can have some clean hedges or something a little bit more rough looking. Once we combine that with some of these other bits of scatter that we've built over the last few episodes, we have a really awesome garden coming together.
Over the next few episodes, I've got even more little bits and pieces of scatter that are going to add to our mazes and garden terrain. But for now, we are left with these brilliant, flexible pieces of terrain that could go down on just about any tabletop environment, from Wargaming to D&D or any other TTRPG that you play. And even better yet, we have a couple of different varieties so you can make them work for whatever you want on your table. I hope you guys have found something you like in this video, and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see more of in the future. Until next time, never stop making stuff.
And for some more of this garden scatter, check out last week's video.